Welcome everyone to our fifth session, I believe, of our peer-to-peer summer series with New Bedford Creative. My name is Jasmyn Baird. I'm the Senior Creative Fellow here, and I want to thank you all for being here. This series is geared to enrich, connect, and educate creatives in our community. For those of you who are from New Bedford, Massachusetts, know that we're home to many artists and creatives, entrepreneurs, etc. And so these sessions are, well, the purpose of the session is to embrace the pulse that makes New Bedford so unique, while expanding our knowledge and connections. So we are able to do this program through MassDevelopment, TDI, and the Barr Foundation. This is just one component of a broader TDI Creative Cities Initiative to boost arts-based economic development. So today's session, we're going to have 15 to 20 minutes of Abby going over her presentation. The last 25 minutes, we're going to do Q&A, but if you have any questions while she's presenting, you can put it in the chat and then we'll address them during the Q&A. We encourage you to stay muted during the presentation. It will be recorded. So once we open up the Q&A, we'll stop the recording. You're welcome to come off of mute and ask any questions that you may have, either about the presentation or anything you're currently working on now, just to get the best use of your time. And I think within the next week, we'll be able to share this recording on our YouTube at New Bedford Creative, so you can be on the lookout for that. So I want to introduce Abigail Hevey, who is the Manager of Grants and Development for Coastal Foodshed. Today, she's going to be talking about best practices and tips for finding and writing grants.
So I am Abby Hevey. Just some real quick bullets about me. I have a master's degree in professional writing from UMass Dartmouth. I've been writing and managing grants since about 2010. And as Jasmyn said, I'm currently the manager of grants and development for Coastal Foodshed, which is a local organization. We work in New Bedford and kind of the South Coast to increase access to local food. And then I consult for a number of local nonprofits in the South Coast region, doing everything from grants research to grant writing to grant management, and then project and program development, which kind of they all just go hand in hand. So today I'm going to talk about pretty much a basic overview. So grant finding. So grant finding, where to look. There are, tons of funders. So there are federal grants, state and local grants, or state and local entities that provide grants, and then private foundations and corporate foundations. So just as examples, federal grants, you go right on to grants.gov, and you can search by department or grant. And this is, I use the examples of DOT, which is the Department of Transportation, FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Association or Agency, I'm not sure. And then the NEA, the National Educators Agency, same thing, National Education Agency. And then state and local, you have your local and state departments will provide grant funding often. I use for the local examples, CDBG and the CPA funding. Those are two, actually big New Bedford. If you're in New Bedford, keep an eye out for those. CDBG is Community Development Block Grant, and CPA is Community Preservation Act. And those are just two types of funding buckets. New Bedford Creative is another. Would you be determined? Could we call you guys local funding? And then MDAR and DOE are just examples of state departments in Massachusetts. MDAR is the Massachusetts Department of Ag Resources. So my local food connection, we look at them quite often. And then DOE, I just use the Department of Education again as an example. Private foundations, this is just two, but there are thousands of private foundations out there. The Island Foundation and the South Coast Community Foundation, again, those are local to the South Coast of Mass. And then corporate banks, those are great. Local banks are a great opportunity for funding, smaller amounts of funding, but they are a great opportunity for funding. And I just used Home Depot and Walmart as examples because I know that they have small corporate funding programs. And then another place, how to look or how to find grant opportunities, sign up for relevant newsletters. whatever your industry or your sector is, there's, a foundation might have a newsletter, or another organization that you work with might have a newsletter. I use MB Creative, that you guys put out a great newsletter on a monthly basis that shows lots of grant opportunities. The South Coast Community Foundation, same thing. They advertise their own funding, but they advertise other people's funding as well. And then again, this MDAR, and then MCC is the Mass Cultural Council. So if you're an artist in Massachusetts, or a performer or whatever, that's a great resource for what grants are out there. Just another little tip: look at other similar organizations for their list of funders. So we do local food, so there are similar organizations that do the same thing, but maybe in Western Mass or Rhode Island or up near Boston, and sometimes they'll list on their website who their funders are. I mean, it sounds bad, but you can go on and who's funding them, and that you can see, oh, that we didn't think of that organization or that foundation. And it just can be another great resource. And then calling local funders or leaders, and asking their advice, or if they have any guidance on potential grant makers. The South Coast Community Foundation has great staff. Same thing with the Island Foundation. And this actually recently happened to me, where an organization I was working for writing a grant for, we didn't get funded. And when I called to kind of just get some feedback, the woman from the foundation also offered, she said, hey, there's this other local foundation. I think they're funding a similar thing. You should look into them. And I did. It didn't end up working out, but it was a good recommendation. And now that foundation's kind of on my radar for other opportunities. So that's just some basic tips. So then when you've found an organization or a funder that you think could be a good fit for your organization or your project, really read the guidelines. Make sure your project is eligible and fits all of their guidelines. Oftentimes we think that our projects and our organizations are wonderful, and they are, but if funders are saying that they only want to fund, arts programming, then don't put your health and wellness program, into their pot, unless it's got an arts component to it or something. But I use this is the Richard and Susan Smith Family Foundation. This is an actual foundation in Massachusetts, and I just screenshot their webpage. But their priorities, you can see, is just an example: health, medical research, education, community giving, and Jewish community. And then they give some more guidelines. You must be a tax exempt nonprofit. You can have a fiscal sponsor, that's fine. And then where they want people in Greater Boston, Eastern Mass, and the gateway cities that they list out. So if you don't fall in that geography, you don't want to apply. I come across great foundations all the time, except that they're funding in California and Pennsylvania and not Massachusetts. So, that you can kind of tick it off your list if you don't fit into that criteria. And then the next, we do not make grants to. This is actually a pretty common list, but to individuals, endowments, or private foundations, religious organizations, where it's being used for religious purposes, and then political campaigns. And then they have this other little piece that they don't sponsor events, conferences, meetings, and they don't buy tables at events. So this varies from funder to funder. And this is, again, just an example, but the key is, if you don't, if something in here, if you don't fit these guidelines, then you can pretty much kind of cross it off the list. Additionally, so if you kind of keep going through and you're like, okay, we meet all the guidelines, great. Next step is just read as much about the funder as possible. What types of projects do they fund? Can you get more details on what types of projects they fund? I use the examples of do they often fund programming? Do they fund general operating costs? Do they only fund capital equipment, capital projects? That's all very important, because if they only fund capital purchases, then you're not going to request programming funding from them, or you don't want to. And then FAQs are always another great thing to look at. I come across a lot of information in FAQ sheets that they don't have on their website at all, or anywhere in the grant guidelines. And then research any previously funded projects. This is, again, a great way to see what they already fund. This Beyond the Walls, again, this is just screenshotted from the Smith Foundation. And they have a whole bunch of, like, they give a whole appendix or whatever you want to call it of all the programs they've funded. And this just shows, like, so capital grant to purchase a flatbed truck that provided critical transportation for staff and supplies to the agency's street art festival and other creative placemaking sites throughout Lynn. So that right there gives you some great, like, okay, they bought them a truck. Like, do we need a truck? Do we need a van? And then they obviously have an interest in creative placemaking and arts. And then again, just attend any webinars that they might offer. These are, again, great places where I always learn something else that they didn't put in their application. Sometimes they'll say things. I was just on one probably a month ago where they said, this isn't in the RFP, but we really want you to focus on X, Y, and Z. This is important to us. So it was like, oh, okay, I'm glad I paid attention to the webinar. And then call the funder if possible. It never hurts, unless they have a site where they say they don't want you to call them. But you can call them and just, hey, I just wanted to talk to you about my project, about my organization. What are your thoughts? And you can get some really good feedback. Sometimes they'll just say, yep, you should apply. Like, we don't offer any feedback, but sometimes they'll give you some really good feedback on what you're applying for. And then this is just a great resource that I use quite often. It's called GuideStar, and it's guidestar.org. This is a great resource for if you can't find much about the funder, or if you can find stuff about the funder, but you're not really sure, like, you want a little bit more of what they fund, or especially how much they fund. So this I pulled up. This is Grimshaw Gudowitz Charitable Foundation. This is a local foundation in the South Coast of Mass. And if you Google them, you'll find nothing about them. There's just some, like, charity navigator type of stuff. So if you go on GuideStar and you search them, this is what comes up. I mean, they're very big PDF documents. It's their 990 forms. Sorry, I'm skipping ahead. You want to look at their 990 forms on GuideStar. These are tax documents that they have to file that show how much money they have, what they've funded, and just other tax information. So when you scroll down in it, you can get to this part right here. And this is on, I want to say it's on almost all of them, but it might not be on every single one of the 990s that you look up, but it's on most of them. And it says, where I circled it in red, it says, check here if the foundation only makes contributions to pre-selected charitable organizations and does not accept unsolicited requests for funds. So that right there, if that's checked off, again, that's just a quick, you can now cross it off your list. That means they only make grants by invitation only. So they will not, if you send them a proposal and they haven't asked you to, then there's just, it's just a waste of your time, basically. And actually, I was doing some grant research yesterday or the day before for an organization, and I kept coming up on these that they were invitation only. But if it's not checked off, like here, then that's great. You can kind of keep going and see what they see if they have other guidelines. And I don't remember. Oh, and this one. So if you look down in the next box A, they've got the name and address and telephone and email of the person that you should contact if you're going to submit an application. And then B, they've got what you should do, right? So send a letter indicating the purpose for which the funds requested, accompanied by a copy of your federal exemption letter and evidence that you're in good standing. C, there are no submission deadlines. And then D, this kind of outlines what they will fund. So this is like, they're basically their guidelines. So I'm not going to read all of it, but obviously it says, they will fund Bristol County, Mass, and Rhode Island areas, and a part of New Hampshire. And they're looking to fund, what do they have? That's projects that benefit education, especially those that enhance business and entrepreneurial. Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped over it. The giving are the arts, education, and especially those that enhance business and entrepreneurial skills, healthcare, and preservation of local culture. So if you fit into that criteria, it gives you, they're just showing you how to go for it and how to apply. And then this is the other thing. again, if you have a funder that you find a lot of information about, but you're not sure how much that you want to request from them, their 990s will also show, in most cases, sometimes it's like an attachment that they don't have in there, but in most cases, it'll show who they've funded and how much they funded them for. So again, this is still that same foundation, the Grimshaw Gudowitz Charitable Fund. And it shows the Buttonwood Park Zoo, Charlton. I'm not going to read them all, and then it lists them, and then it shows how much they've funded. So this, obviously, from this one screenshot, I wouldn't ask for any more than $10,000 from them, or you have a range of knowing, so you don't ask them for $50,000 and they kind of look at your application like you're a little crazy. All right, and grant writing. So again, just like high level process on grant writing. So read the full application process. As soon as I get a grant in front of me that I've checked off all the boxes and I know, like, okay, we can apply for this, I know what we're going to apply for. I always try to do this a few weeks ahead of time. Get down the deadline, the date and time. It sounds silly, but sometimes it's due at 4 o'clock in the afternoon or no later than noon. So you want to make sure, obviously, that you have the deadline. 9 out of 10 grant funders don't want to, if you don't make it by the deadline, then your application is not going to be reviewed. The submission process, this is another one. Just make sure you know how you can submit the document. Email and grant portal are usually the most common, but I'll tell you, last week I just had one that I had to print out 3 copies of, and I had to hand deliver it to City Hall. So you want to make sure that you don't miss that, because that's one of those things at the 11th hour that you're like, oh God, I have to print this out and scramble to get it somewhere physically. And then the application questions and outline. This is one of the first things I do. I just take everything out and I pull it into a Google Doc. And if there's a grant portal that you need to sign into, it's just good practice to go, like, just sign into it as early as you can. One, because sometimes they have crazy registration questions that you think that it's just kind of putting in your name and email, but it might be something that takes you an hour to fill out. And you just want to make sure that you don't have any technical issues with any of that. And that, especially on the federal side, do that as soon as possible. And then I pull out the questions right out of the portal into the Google Doc. So I know, what are the questions I need to answer? Because sometimes it might be something that it's not that simple, and you're going to have to do a little research, or you're going to have to talk to somebody else to get the answer. Same thing with attachments. Just know what attachments are due, because attachments oftentimes, like financials and budget, anything to do with that, you might have to go to your CFO or whoever your financial person is in your organization, and you just, you don't want to bother them 2 hours before the thing is due to get the information you need. And same thing, letters of support. That's another one. If you are required letters of support, you want to give people time to get them back to you. So just be aware of all the stuff that they're asking you for. Templates. This is just a note on templates. If they suggest a template or they have a template, just use their template. Even if they call it a suggested template, just use their template. They're reviewing a lot of these, and the templates are there for a reason, so that they can find the information that they're looking for quickly. And then just other stipulations you want to make sure you keep an eye on. There's reimbursement-based grants. Actually, if anyone was listening to us talk before this, there are a lot of, I shouldn't say a lot, but there are some funders that you have to front the money first, and then you have to show them a receipt for what you purchased, and then they will reimburse you with the grant funding if you're awarded. And this is actually for Coastal Foodshed. We weren't able to apply for a grant just this past year because we couldn't afford, we couldn't flow the cash ahead of time. I mean, this was like tens of thousands of dollars, but that is an important stipulation to know, or condition. And the same thing with match requirements. This is more common with federal grants and local grants and state grants, but sometimes you have to match the grant request with like a 20% match. And this has killed me on grants before too, where we can't come up with the cash match. Sometimes you can do cash and in kind and it's easier to put together, but again, it's just something to note. And then timeline requirements. This is actually, it's a silly one, but this one catches me every once in a while. This is just making sure you understand what their award timeline is. So you might be writing the grant might be due in September, but they're not going to award the grant until January. So you just want to make sure that your timeline doesn't say you're going to start spending the money in November, or that your program starts in November. Because then obviously it doesn't match up with what they're looking for. And just a note on the bottom, you can't receive grant funding for costs that you have already incurred. You can't, so back to that example I just gave. If you're not going to get the grant funding until January, and you do get the grant funding in January, you can't use any of that grant funding for something that you purchased a month or two before, unless they say that you can do that in the grant, in the request for proposals, which sometimes they do. And actually with COVID, they're like allowing that all over the place now, but most of the time you can't use funding. As somebody who freelances as a grant writer, they'll say, oh, well, we get the funding, then we'll pay you. And that's not like a thing. It's not, you can't retroactively pay someone. So this is just an example I pulled from the Island Foundation, again, a local funder. This is right off their page, and it shows how they apply for funding. So initial contact, you need to call them to determine, call or write to them to determine if you're even eligible for their funding. And then that part two, if you do get the green light to submit a proposal, they show you exactly what you need to submit. So again, this is where I would just take this and I would pull it right over into a Google Doc. They've got the cover letter, and then in the second bullet, 3 to 5 page proposal. And here are your headings: a brief history of the organization, your project need, project goals, methods used to meet your goals, and then measures of success and qualifications of your organization and staff. And then they list all the things that they want attached, a project budget, and past and current year budgets for the overall organization, a most recent financial statement or audit, your list of board of directors and staff, your 501c3 status, and then any supplementary materials, which is an optional thing. Again, this is just the Island Foundation, but this is, they're different for everyone, but it's usually somewhere along the same lines, but just some, with some differences here and there. Grant writing checklist. This is, again, just like a high level, what you want to make sure your proposal has. Obviously, you're answering all of the questions that they're asking you to answer, but you usually want to try to touch upon all of these things somehow in the proposal. So demonstrating a clear need, why do you do what you do? What need are you fulfilling in your community? Is there a gap in services? Is there some other community need? And that can be a sentence or two, but just showing why you're relevant, why they need to fund you. And then anytime you can back that up with relevant data or statistics is always great. I pulled this little box down here, the C and D, down in the corner. This is actually from New Bedford Creative's Arts and Cultural Plan. And this is, looking at D, if you were doing a public art project, I would literally say something like, oh, and funding this public art project is important because in New Bedford Creative's Arts and Culture Plan, they said they want to expand public art in New Bedford, and, and quote it verbatim with what they are saying they want. So you're showing it's not just you that thinks this is important, other people think it's important too. So anytime you can point to statistics, reports that have been done, anything that just backs up your work, or backs up your argument, I should say. And then providing a clear scope of the project. What are you going to do? And I can't see the slide all the way, but what is the way you're going to do it? Just so they know, you want them to know, walk away from reading your proposal knowing exactly what it is you're going to do. And then define the impact that your project will have. Again, what is the thing, and anytime you can quantify that, that's great. Sometimes you can't quantify it, but we're gonna we're going to provide swim lessons to 30 New Bedford children, or, you know, we're going to have public art on display that's open and free to the public to look at. Whatever that impact is, just be clear. And then use your own statistics that you have. And if you don't have any data right now, I always encourage to start collecting any kind of data you can. Is that enrollment numbers? Is that what are your participants' demographics? Anything that you can collect and quantify. And then just your organization or your credentials, your ability to meet the demand. Again, this is just to show that you're not just some random person that has an idea that you want to do. This is to show that you have either your organization or you have the credentials and the experience and ability to put on the program. And then present a clear and realistic and detailed budget, and a clear and realistic timeline. This is again just, and actually everything in your proposal should just be clear and realistic. So if you're a brand new organization starting out and you have no money, you don't want to go ask someone for $200,000 to implement this program at every New Bedford school and reach 12,000 kids, right? You might want to start with like one school, one classroom, but just be clear and realistic. And the same thing, the timeline, this is just one of those things. Think through your timeline and think through your activities. Sometimes it's not as simple as just saying, okay, we're gonna put on this project, we're gonna put on this program. I wrote a grant about a year ago where we wanted, the gist of the grant was to do a program to bring social activities to elderly women, but we needed to hire someone to do the project for us. So I built into the timeline, writing a job description, interviewing people, hiring the actual person, getting the person onboarded, right? So it wasn't, we would get the funding in March, but it wasn't probably until June that we were going to actually start doing the meat of the program. But just think through all of those steps that you need to take. And then, is it sustainable and or scalable? Funders love to ask how you're going to sustain your project. And this is, they don't want to, shouldn't say they don't want to, they often don't want to feel like they're going to fund you for the next 30 years to keep the program going. So, you can say you're going to raise funds from donors, you're going to look for sponsorships, you're going to look for other grant opportunities, you're building in some kind of fee or revenue generating piece to your program. And then scalable, is it just something, can you replicate it? So back to that example I gave of, you're not going to start with the entire school district, but maybe you're going to start in one school and one classroom, but you can grow it to reach 2 more classrooms the following year, and so on. And then you're reaching more people and more kids or whoever over time. And then my last bullet, just who, what, when, where, and how. This is kind of like a nod to I don't know, 8th grade English. But I literally do this every single time I write a grant. I just sit down and I ask myself, okay, have I said who is going to be helped? What is the thing? When are we doing it? Where are we doing it? And how are we going to do it? And the number of times that I've realized, oh my God, I didn't say that this is in New Bedford, or I didn't say that this is who we're working with. It's just a good tool to kind of review and make sure that you've touched all the bases that you need to explain the project. And then just some other quick tips. Follow the application as presented, and make sure you're always following any guidelines as far as font size, what the font is, the number of pages you're allowed to use, any of that stuff. And I pulled the thing from the Island Foundation just to show they have the 3 to 5 page proposal. So don't go over 5 pages. And then put it in the order that they have it. Brief history of the organization, project need, project goals. You always want to remember that reviewers are looking at dozens of proposals. So you want to make it as easy as possible for them to find the information that they're looking for. And then knowing your audience, these next 2 bullets, knowing your audience and using simple language, it's just, you don't want to assume people know everything about what you're talking about or your particular topic. And then there are times though that you might have a funder who is extremely knowledgeable. So you want to make sure that, oops, sorry. Oh, I just saw it. Thanks, Anita. You want to make sure that they know that you're just talking to the right audience. And then brevity is key. So just be brief and to the point and clear. Weave their language into the proposal. A lot of times, they'll call things certain things, or they'll, how each end sector kind of has its own language. You're just giving them a nod that you are on the same page and you know what you're talking about. And you're just showing them that that you fit their criteria. Use bulleted lists. These next three, use bulleted lists, write short paragraphs, and white space. These are all just, again, it's easier for people to read when it's clear and to the point, and there's plenty of white space, because again, they're looking at dozens of proposals. So you want to make it easier for them to read and review your proposal. I will say though, you have to watch out for page limits. Sometimes you can't do this, and sometimes you have to put a horrible looking block of text into the proposal because you can't go over the page limit. And then drafting letters of support for partners. This is just a tip this is to all my friends who get sent letters of support and asked to write them. If you need to write a letter of support for the grant application, draft it up for the person you're asking and then send it to them. You tell them that they can edit it any way they want, but you're just doing the work for them, because otherwise, unless they are super familiar with everything that you're doing and applying for, you're just basically asking someone to kind of come up with a letter. So it's just a nice thing to do, to draft the letter of support for them. And then opportunity to collaborate and do not duplicate similar project programs. These kind of play off of each other. Just be aware of what other projects are going on in your community. Funders are very knowledgeable of what's going on in their community. So they don't want to see often a project that's replicating something that someone else is doing. Or they want to see, oh, there's more need for more of this service, that's why you're doing it. But just be aware, or if there's an opportunity to collaborate with another organization, that's always a bonus and a benefit. And then the last bullet is just to kind of flip your perspective around of thinking, if you were being asked to donate to the organization, what is it that you would want to, what would you want to see that organization doing? Or think of the organizations that you donate to. You usually want to know that they're having an impact in the community, and that you know what that impact is, and that you have an idea that it's like good people running the program. So just another way to think about kind of how you frame your proposal. And then the last piece, just a quick grant management, because often we think that it ends when we submit the grant proposal, but if you get funded, you actually have to do the project now. So the grant proposal is often just like the prerequisite to the actual project. So just a quick, send a thank you letter to the funder. It's just always a nice thing to do. And then write down any and all reporting deadlines and requirements, and then make sure you meet the deadlines and requirements. You're hopefully starting to build a relationship with a funder. So they want to make sure that you can handle the money correctly, and do the thing that you said you're going to do. And so back to the grant writing part of this and developing the program, this is why you also want to be very realistic about your proposal and your project. Because if you say, oh, we're going to reach 12,000 students in New Bedford Public Schools, now you have to implement a program and you have to try to reach 12, right? So if you only end up reaching 50 students, you're going to have to really figure out how you're going to explain this to the funder that you weren't able to do that. And again, funders they're smart. They know when you're overreaching for something, and they want you to be realistic in any of your, or in all of your proposal. And then keep in contact with the funder. I don't know if I've ever implemented a project that I said I was going to propose like exactly the way it was proposed. So it's just good to reach out and say, hey, we got delayed and it took us longer to hire this person, so we just want to let you know what's going on. It's just keeping in touch with them and making sure that you're not surprising them with anything at the end of the project. Figure out how you're going to track your data if you're not already tracking it. And this can be a simple like Excel spreadsheet. This doesn't need to be, you don't need to go buy some massive software program to track your data. And then again, just another reminder, don't spend any of the money until you have a signed contract or award letter or an actual check from someone. You just don't want to get yourself in a situation where you've spent money that you don't have and now you're not going to get the grant funding. And then just follow up and build a relationship with the funder. And, you know, hopefully they get to know you and they love your programming, and they, over time, they want to fund you even more money. And then just, if you didn't get the money, it's okay. Follow up with the funder if they allow it, and ask them for a debrief or feedback on your proposal, your application. This is a great way to get information and basically write a better proposal the next time, or a stronger proposal. And then try again. I've written a number of proposals a number of times, and I've gotten it the second time or the third time or the fourth time. So I don't know, that is pretty much the gist of my presentation. Any questions?
So can you say a little bit more when you're doing your budget and they ask for matching funds, what, explain the in-kind, like how do you determine what's in-kind? If in-kind is eligible, how do you determine what that is?
Yeah. So in-kind is any like indirect, like non-other cash. I'm gonna use construction as an example because I feel like that might be the easiest way. So if you're getting grant funding, or if you're seeking grant funding to build like a discovery center for your organization, and it's going to cost $1 million, and you need to come up with 20% that's either in kind or cash. So cash would obviously be someone else is paying directly for that building part of the $1 million that you're requesting. In kind is just any, like the time that the program manager is spending managing the project overall. So it would be their salary that you could call in kind. Or if someone's donating bricks, this is a horrible example, bricks to build the building, right? They're donating all that. You can put a cash, or you can put a price to that and use that towards your in-kind match. God, I'm trying to think of more common scenarios of
well, I'm asking because if you're an individual artist, which, you know,
yeah,
a lot of some of them have grant writing experience, others don't as much. So maybe $1 million isn't like,
yeah, no,
like
yeah,
$10,000 might be
I know, I'm
more
trying
equivalent.
So if it's your public art program and you're requesting, you're trying to do like a public sculpture, and you're requesting $600 for your sculpture, and you have to show some kind of in-kind. Yep, yeah, that's great, Ebony. It's just anything related to the project that's not cash, but that is still related to the project that you can put a price on, and include as a cost of the overall project. So your sculpture, you're buying the materials, so it's your time, you're asking for money for your time, but it's not just your time that goes into the project. You need to buy materials. Maybe you have some volunteers working with you on the public project. You have to transport the thing, so you could put, you know, your mileage, your transportation costs, your supplies costs. Is that a better example?
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of in kind of coming up with
of matching. I mean, it's hard if you are not, if you're not in a larger organization that already has a good base. That can be difficult sometimes.
It can be, yeah. And I feel like more commonly, I mean, that's federal grant programs ask for matches, state and local sometimes ask for matches. More common, I think, is to show that they're not the only person funding all of your work. So to point to the idea that there are other foundations, or you have donors, or you have sponsors, it's just showing that you as the project manager or the artist is not 100% dependent upon this foundation to fund. And actually, now that I think about it, the cultural council grants, you can show, it's not a requirement if I am correct, but you can show like the other funders and how you're building your budget out all the way, and that they're just a piece of the overall project. But again, I guess it's like looking at everything holistically and not just that one like piece that you're looking for funding for. Does that answer the question better?
Yeah, it
Better
does.
guidance.
The other thing that I just in talking with many individual artists, the whole like not being awarded a grant, that rejection can be taken personally, and they're really like, I like how you said, you know, to call and get a debrief.
Oh yeah.
And builds that relationship with the funder, because, you know, so that your next proposal is stronger.
Yeah. And I think what might be hard, and this is like an assumption, this isn't based off of anything, but you've got to put like your business hat on when writing a grant proposal, and not necessarily your arts and creativity side of things. And it might sound like bad, but it's, you know, what is that impact that you're looking for, and how does your art make that impact? So the art is very important, but it's beyond just the thing that you're doing or creating. What, you know, what is the impact that it brings? What is the need it fills? And I'm trying to, you know, I often, when I've worked with on arts related, talking about, you know, just like supporting the local economy, and the artists support the local economy. They support the, you know, with placemaking, they support the, you know, the sense of place and identity that's unique and specific to whatever, you know, geography, you know, whatever town you're in. I'm trying to think of other ways that I've expressed that. If you're working with children, you can always tie it to STEAM, you know, it's a STEAM based project, you know, that enhances kids' education and stuff like that. But really getting more to the, but again, that holistic, it's not just the project, it's how does this project impact all these other things, and how are you explaining that? And if you can quantify that, again, if they can throw even a couple sentences, and that's the example for our artists, especially of the arts and culture plan that you guys put together. I mean, that is a nugget, like that thing is full of, it's a gold mine. It's full of reasons that the city has said we want to support art, that they should quote all the time and say, you know, the arts plan says that they want art because of X, Y, and Z. So it's not just, you know, I always joke that it's like when your spouse won't listen to you, so you have to like bring someone in to be like the expert, then they'll listen to the expert.
Yeah.
tell you the same thing. But truly, you've got to back it up with some kind of statistics, or some kind of credentialed person that's saying this is why. If you can, it's always just a good practice to do so.
The other thing that I'm glad you brought up the statistics and the quantifiable data. Recently you sent me a link to the census data.
Oh yeah.
I would love to share that with everyone.
Oh God, yeah, go for it.
If you're working in a specific neighborhood, now, you know, we're talking about New Bedford, but the link that you provided is anywhere in the country. So it boils down the 2020 census data by census tract, which is in neighborhoods. So if you're working in a particular neighborhood or a couple neighborhoods, what I loved about that link is that you can just look at the census tract data, and then you have a breakdown of age, you have a breakdown of race, you have a breakdown of income. So, you know, of multi-languages spoken in the household. So that I think is a potential huge and easy way to, you know, back up whatever project that you're doing. And when you know, because I've read enough grants now that people make general statements like,
Mhm.
we're gonna bring this project to low income families, and well, really, like, where are they and how
Yeah.
are you going to reach them?
Yeah.
So whenever you can be what you just said, be specific and realistic. If you
Yeah.
break it down by that, it was a huge help.
Yeah, well, and just being really clear. And that's, like I said, that silly little like who, what, when, how, and where, like it just really makes you stop. Because some grant applications are, it's just like it's just like a couple paragraphs, but you still want to make sure that they walk away knowing exactly what it is you're trying to do, and exactly how you're going to implement that. And again, this doesn't need to be like a 20-page business plan, but I'm always, whenever I work with my clients, I'm always trying, like because they'll come to me and they'll say, oh, we want to do this in New Bedford Public Schools. And I'm like, okay, what school do you want? Like, what actual school? What class? Like, you gotta get, like, have you even talked to somebody from that school? Do you know that they are even interested in this? And so it really goes beyond just your project idea, that there's got to really be a plan in place, and a real project development that you can realistically, you, and I'm sure, Margot, you've said this before too, of like, oh God, what if we actually got this grant money? Like, we love our idea and we love our project, but you've got to implement it. So you want to make sure that you are putting something on the table that is real.
Yes.
Because you don't, I feel like we've all stared down I feel like it's a very rookie mistake. And I know I made this mistake early on in my career of like, that sounds like a great number. We'll like print like 2,000 of those and distribute like 2,000. Like, that's an easy number. And then you learn quickly on the ground that like, oh my God, this is a crazy number. Why would I ever say that we would reach 2,000 people? And that's just a lack of experience and not knowing. But those are the things that you really want to think through of like, okay, how much can we really print? How many people could we really reach? And funders, again, people think, well, we got to have big numbers or they're not going to want to fund it. But they want realistic numbers. And I mean, and that also does go along with the budget though. So if you're being realistic and you know that you only have the capacity to reach one classroom of kids, 20 kids, well, then you can't ask for $50,000 to do the thing for the 20 kids, right? So it all kind of ties in together, if that makes sense.
It does. And I think one other common mistake by newer grant writers is not quantifying their own time. A lot, and I'm not saying a lot, but I've seen some proposals by artists and look at the budget and I'm like, okay, this is going to take, this is like a part-time job and I'm not seeing you pay yourself. So doing that realistic budget and making sure that it's like the airline where the oxygen masks come down and you take care of yourself first, because then it's just burnout, like you've done this amazing project, but you've worked so hard and haven't been paid for it.
Yeah, so no, for sure.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think what's great about the exercise too is that you're going through you're really laying out how you add value and why you should get compensated for that. And I love that there has been so much more focus on funding arts and artists. And I feel like Massachusetts has such a strong, between the Mass Cultural Council, and just other funders that I've come across, there's just and you guys, there's such a strong focus on like you do add value. It's not just, you don't just make like pretty things, like you add value, you attract tourists to the town. Again, that local economic development is a wonderful buzzword in any grant I feel like I've ever written in my entire life, just as a like another hint on the side. But pointing to that, and especially like politicians love to point to that, politicians love to see that, and funders. So you're again, you're showing that it's not just about we're funding someone to make a painting, I'm just making something, but you are you are creating something that is going to have this much bigger impact in the community. And then there, on the artist side, there's the representation. And I mean, I love in New Bedford, there's been such a focus on, artists of color and creating murals with people of color in them. And I mean, that representation, that's huge. And just all of those things that you can talk about, the why you want to do the stuff that you want to do, or create the thing that you want to create. Yeah, I just think that strengthens any application.
Thank you for joining us. Like I said, the recording can be found. Oh, thank you, Abby. The recording can be found on our YouTube in a week. I want to thank our funders again, MassDevelopment, TDI, and the Barr Foundation for making this possible. And yeah, thank you so much for everyone's time. And I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day.